Okay, so I ordered the Firestone rite single pneumatic control switch for my rear suspension airbag so that I could control my airbag pressure from inside the cab of my truck. Usually, when I get something like that I'm unfamiliar with, because that's just not a very common thing in cars, it's not like changing the engine oil. I just YouTube a video of how to briefly, and that gives me enough of an idea of what I'm doing that I can do it. Trying to YouTube that, however, nothing popped up. So I did it. I was able to do everything. I mean, it just took a little bit of thinking on my part without actually seeing a video, but I'm going to give y'all a brief video of what I did. So, here I have, my truck is a 2017 Dodge Ram 2500. And the single panel control switch, it originally came in a little bracket that held the gauge and the switch, but I really didn't know a good way to put that to mount it in my truck that the gauge would be easily visible and the switch would be readily available to inflate and deflate the airbags. So instead, I bought a gauge pod mount for the gauge, and I took the switch and the gauge out of the original Firestone assembly and made my own setup. So here's the gauge pod mount. I know it's dark outside and it's kind of hard to see, but I did that intentionally. I ordered something for the newer 2017 Ram, I think 2013 and up actually, you can get a steering column gauge pod mount. And the wiring is back behind the gauge pod. You can't see it, but I routed the wiring through the same rubber grommet that the steering column goes through. And I got a fuse splitter and tied it in to an ignition source. That circuit will only be whole when the key is in the ignition and in the on position. As you can see, the gauge lit up. If I turn the key off, gauge goes out. Turn the key on, light turns on the gauge. So now we'll get under the hood and I'll show you exactly what I was talking about. It was just a cheap part that I picked up at AutoZone. And these new 2017 Dodge trucks, they don't have typical fuses. And they don't even have mini amp fuses, they have micro fuses. So I didn't know micro fuses, but there's the gauge splitter. It's probably kind of hard to see. Turn the light on. There's a gauge splitter right there, tied into that circuit. And there's two little micro fuses in that splitter. So, like I said, that just goes through right where the rubber grommet is in the firewall. And of course I've got a onboard air compressor cylinder set up, so I've got several aftermarket wires to my battery. But fuse box, the wire to the splitter, and through the rubber grommet into the cab. Which comes through inside right there and up along the steering column through the back of the steering column, and I drilled a couple of holes in the back of that gauge pod into the gauge itself so that it's lit up again with the key. Keys off, it's not lit up. Keys on, it lights up. And next to where I mounted my two compressor switches. There's a switch. Inflation is up, deflation is down. And I have two dual compressors. But anyways, it's really simple the way that I did it. There's only one air tubing, the red tubing right there. There's only one air tubing that goes to the gauge, and that is teed. Let me see if I can lay down on the floorboard and I can show you from underneath. That is teed right there. That line goes into what's marked DEF, and that black piece that you see the tubing going into, that is the back of the switch. So the red tubing comes from my air tank to DEF in the back of the switch. The gray tubing is what I have routed going to, oh no, the red switch is what goes to my airbags. The gray tubing is what goes to my air tank. And I'll show you that. But that T, that just goes over, up, through the steering column, and to the back of the gauge itself. And the other red tubing goes to the airbags. But, so, as you can see, both the red and the gray come out of that out of that rubber grommet, and they turn down through the engine bay to the underbelly of the truck. And I simply took those two pipes and I ran them above the frame supports all the way down with the wiring harness to my compressors to the back of the truck. Now, if we get underneath the back, you can see that red plumbing is right here. It comes up to a T, and that T, one way, goes to one airbag, which is right over there. You can kind of see it behind the spring there. And the other way, it goes to the other airbag on the other side. So both of my airbags are controlled by one pipe. That T in the center, that second T, that's another separate line for manual inflation should the switch ever quit working. And that tubing I just routed right past the spare tire over to a typical Schrader valve that you can install and manually inflate them at any gas station air pump. Or if you're like me and you have an onboard air cylinder, then you can get your own pump like that right there. So that's a brief synopsis of what I did. Thanks for watching. I hope that was informatory.